Walking down memory lane, it's always one of those mixed bag situations. I actually love the nostalgia of thinking back about times in the past childhood in those years. And at the same time, it dredges up sometimes things that we'd rather forget. Well, one way or another, we're going to be having that conversation today. So put on the brakes, grab a cup of coffee, and join the conversation because it's time for Coffee Breaks with Steve. We didn't want Chelan here quite yet. I'm taking her out. Don't know why she was in there. That was probably me. But welcome to Coffee Breaks with Steve. I'm Steve Glavin, and this is the show where we come together around our virtual coffee table each week and join the conversation to chat about interesting topics with amazing guests. If you're joining for the first time today, welcome. And if you've been with us before, welcome back. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one because this was one that was actually prompted and set up by Chelan, who's going to be joining us in a few minutes live. But we recorded a video, and you may have noticed in the promos this week, this is going to be a two-parter because the conversation got so involved and so in-depth. I am obviously quite capable of rambling incessantly and talking without stopping for breath. And once Chelan started prompting me about memories from my childhood and earliest memories and where we lived when, etc., I just told the stories. I just shared what I remembered. I mentioned it already in the comments. I'm glad that my sister Kathy is here today. By the way, good morning, Kathy. And if you are here today, do make sure that you say hello and let us know that you're here. Rick is here. And participate in this conversation. It's going to be a lot of me, even in the video when we get there, but it's things that for some of you on here, I know for a fact, including Kathy, but others who are on here, they're going to be things that relate to time frames that we share, whether it was always experiences that we shared or not. It's time frames that we share. And so you're going to have your own experiences. Carol is here. Good. This is stuff that my wife, Carol, probably knows most of these stories, hopefully. I was surprised, actually, and you'll catch this when we get to the video, that I've never been shy about sharing stories about my childhood. And so I was actually a little bit surprised that there were some elements that I shared that it was new information for Chelan, or at least some of the details and the perspectives and the time frames for it were, but we'll get to that. I do want to get to our sweet and savory today and just share a few fun facts. We all know, I think, hi, Jerry. I'm glad you're here, Jerry, because you're one of those people who shares some of the time frame that we're going to be talking about, a little bit of it at least. But you may have your own memories of some of the eras and the events, as will many of you on here, I'm sure. But anyway, let me share a few things. We all know that there's a holiday coming up this week, right? On Friday, July 4th. What is July 4th? Independence Day. It's the day that we celebrate that date in 1776 when our founding fathers in the Second Continental Congress, sitting in a dark room in Philadelphia, decided, well, they'd actually voted a couple of days before and agreed almost unanimously on independence. That's another story, almost unanimously. We won't go into that. But the adoption of they're taking that document that Thomas Jefferson did a lot of the writing for and doing their modifications and voting to accept the Declaration was 2 days later. And it was still several days before it was announced publicly. But John Adams always thought that July 2nd would be the date that would be celebrated year after year because that was the date they actually voted for independence. But that was because that wasn't documented specifically in the same way. July 4th has become the date. But anyway, we've got that celebration this Friday. Anybody doing anything special for the celebration this Friday? curious to know about that. Chelan, celebrating independence from the British, and also that's right. If you're familiar with the movie, it's truly our Independence Day that we, yeah. Also, a couple of birthdays I want to mention this week. Jared Garlick celebrating a birthday this week on the 29th, right, Kathy? And we want to wish Jared a very happy birthday, and hope that he gets a chance with family to do some celebrating. And then also Kyle Vandola Evans. If you recall from a few months back, we had a conversation with a couple who are professional jousters living in England. And Kyle is a professional jouster and official who marshals a professional competitive jousting tournaments. And Kyle is celebrating a birthday this week as well on the 30th. So happy birthday to Kyle Vandola Evans. Do you have a special day this week? Put it in the chat so that we know we can celebrate with you. And wait, I have to stop for a second. Kathy Garlick. I asked some of my younger students last year if they knew what we celebrated on July 4th. More than one said Jesus' birthday. That's like the joke about, well, we won't go into it. There's a Groundhog Day joke as well that kind of goes with that. But if you do have a special day this week, please put it in the chat so that we can acknowledge it and celebrate with you. And if you've got one coming up later in this year at any point, month of July, or even all the way through December, all the way really through June of next year, so that we get it on the calendar and we don't leave you out. But you can send us an email at cbwsteve@comcast.net, so we make sure that we do celebrate that with you. All right, listen, I want to get to our topic, and so that means I also want to bring our special guest host on. And so I think you all know Chelan. If you don't know Chelan, that's Chelan. Chelan.
Hello.
Hello. So
Hello.
we'll run the video here in a minute of the first part of the conversation that you and I had. But
I just want to mention that, as usual, I dressed up special for coffee breaks.
So we had a conversation that you prompted. And I'm just wondering very briefly, if before we run the video, what was it that prompted you? Because you pitched the idea without giving me any specifics at all several months ago. And we were working to find a time to do this. But you, for some reason, were prompted to want to facilitate a conversation with me about my childhood and earliest memories. We've talked about my childhood before.
Yeah.
I haven't written that. So what prompted it?
I honestly, when I think back, I'm wondering if it was things like getting ads for gifts for Mother's Day and Father's Day, of like, Mom, I want to hear your story. Right?
Yeah.
Give her this book, give her this thing, and she'll get a whole thing of her story. I'm like, yeah, I want to do that with Mom, but also I want to do that with Dad because he's such a storyteller. And I that feeling of like, with your life and your stories, it's like a familiar movie that you know you love, that you keep catching on TV, but you only catch parts.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to sit down and hear the whole story.
Well, we've talked about before writing all these things down.
In New York.
Yeah. We've talked about writing these things down, or, even recording. That's become popular now, is that you, record your life story. And so in a way, we've started that process by doing this. By the way, I want to say hello to Dee Dee. I saw that Dee Dee is out here. And if you are here, do make sure that you say hello. But anyway, I think now we're going to give a shot at this video. And again, I'm going to be counting heavily on my sister Kathy and her comments to fact check my memories, because some of them are just from, we all have kind of a different perspective. And some of these go back to a pretty young age. And
Kathy, I wasn't there, so I couldn't.
And you weren't there, but Kathy was for just really about all of this. And did I say hi to Rick yet? Hi, Rick. But I'm going to be counting on any of you to kind of fill in your own memories about some of these time frames and eras and what you remember, because some of them are tied to things that happened regionally, nationally, or just that we were growing up with. And I'd love to know what you think. So here is my conversation with Chelan, prompting me about my childhood.
Steve Glavin, Poppy Extraordinaire.
Yeah.
I'm sure you were wondering why I called you here today.
Well, it's been a bit of a mystery all along, but I figured I'd find out once I got here, which is usually what happens anytime our family gets together.
It's typical. I wanted to get some stories from you, some of which I know I have some favorites, which we might go to, but I might run into other stories that you have not told me was the hope as well. And so I thought I would just extract from you various tales from your childhood.
Okay. So,
whether you want to or not, it's happening.
yeah.
Like a dentist.
I don't know if I mean, you let me know, because I started out really being born. That's where my childhood began. And I don't know
Steve
how,
Martin.
yeah, I don't know how close to that event you want to begin or what you want.
What is your earliest memory?
Oh, earliest memory. This one has been open to a little bit of debate in terms of my actual age and what I actually remember, but it was centered around a trip to I call it the old Portland Zoo. It's the Portland Zoo when it used to be up where Washington Park is now, before the current. I think the current zoo opened like in 1961 or 62.
Yes, but isn't the current zoo also in Washington Park? Like, that's a huge park. It's kind of in there.
Yeah, I mean, if you actually go up like closer to the Rose Gardens and that type of thing in Washington Park, there's still some remnants. There's still some buildings there that were part of the original zoo. And the story, I think part of the reason that I have the memory is, when certain stories from your childhood are being repeated and they're brought up from that time forward, you have a tendency to hang on to certain memories. And so I have clarity of certain issues. But the point was, I was still in a stroller. I was probably somewhere between a year, less than 2 years old, maybe 2 years old, around there. I think it was no later than about summer of fall of 1957, maybe a little bit later. I don't know, somewhere between. I was born in 1956, so let's just get that out there. I'm old, but we went to the zoo.
So in this memory, there's men with pants up to here, and there's ladies with cat eye glasses and the 50s style dresses,
and dinosaurs wandering around, that type of thing,
and the occasional.
Yeah.
Pterodactyl.
Now, we were at the zoo, and it was a big family event. Like, there were elements of the extended family there, and I'll get into that in a minute. But the reason it kept being brought up was that I said a funny. I was in my stroller, apparently, and we were at the elephant enclosure, and one of the elephants relieved itself, urinated, and I announced it very loudly. Only I didn't say, hey, look, that elephant just urinated. I said something to the effect of, elephant, go pee-pee potty. But I said it very loud, and it got laughs from all over. Now, that's the part that people repeated to me, and I don't remember the specific moment of saying it, but I remember being in my stroller and people laughing. Now, a couple of things. Let me back up, because one of the memories I have, which, again, nobody would have mentioned to me, was in my stroller, on the sidewalk of the parking lot after we arrived, that my older sister, Kathy, who would have been probably about 4 years old at the time, came in a different car, came with someone else, because part of my memory is sitting in my stroller and seeing her running down the sidewalk toward me. That would not have been part of what people would have relayed to me, but I have a memory of that. The other memory that I have is that immediately after I announced the elephant's bodily functions and people started laughing, that I looked up, and the person I recall seeing was my Aunt Dolores, who got divorced from my uncle probably a year later. That's the only, I've seen pictures of her, and that's why I know that was her, but it's the only actual memory I have. She used to babysit us apparently during that time, but I don't remember any of her babysitting specifically, but I remember her looking down and laughing at me, and no one would have specifically mentioned that. So I do have that memory from very, very early childhood. I have a lot of memories from that era. We lived in a little town called Wishram. It's in Washington. It's about 20 miles east of the Dalles on the Washington side of the river. And you'll see it if you're driving on the highway, you'll see it. There is a railroad bridge that goes across. If you're coming from like Eastern Washington, where you and I live now.
I'm tempted just to have you go through the memories that you have, like the next and the next and the next, and see if there's anything I haven't heard yet.
Yeah, there's some from Wishram, and the only thing I can tell you about specific ages is that we moved from Wishram to Portland when I was a little over 5 years old. So I think I turned 5 in June of 1961. Is that right? Yeah. And we moved to Portland, I believe, in October of that year. My dad worked for the railroad. Wishram was a little railroad town, still is a little railroad town. It's just not as, it was actually a fairly robust little tiny town back then.
Right.
But he was transferred to the Portland office, and that's why we moved to Portland. But every memory I have of Wishram, I had to have been 5 years old or younger. And I do have some memories. Some of this may or may not be in chronological order because, again, I don't know exactly how old I was. Probably somewhere with some of these.
In my head, you had lived in Wishram like until you were 10. So that's news to me that every Wishram memory is from this tiny chunk of your life.
Yeah. Within the first 5 years
2 to
of my
5.
life, was basically.
2 to 5. That's your memory.
I remember things like, I loved the railroad. I loved the trains, probably where your nephew, my grandson Jameson, gets it. It's probably a hand-me-down memory, but
it's genetic.
It's genetic. But we had a swing set in our backyard, and we lived in Wishram on what was called Railroad Street. There were two main streets that kind of ran the full length of Wishram. One was Main Street. Every town has Main Street. And one was Railroad Street. And Railroad Street was a little closer to the railroad tracks and the river. I mean, we weren't like right on the river, but there were, if you look at that area on a map, you'll see the railroad tracks, the main lines run not too far from the river. And then when you get closer to Wishram, it splits off. And then you had the yards, the switching yards in Wishram. And I used to have to take a nap when I was little. Up until at least when I was 4. But I can remember getting up from my naps, and I loved to put on my bib overalls, and I had like a flannel shirt that had trains all over it, and a bandana and a railroad hat, and I'd go out and I'd get on the glider swing on our swing set and pretend like I was driving a train.
Conducting the train, yeah.
And there were certain times, and I think probably again instinctively just from even as a little kid, you knew what time the trains were coming by. They were scheduled. The freight trains would come through.
Trains are coming. The garbage man is coming. Yeah.
The garbage man is coming. Many of the crews that worked on the trains either lived in Wishram or it was a common transfer point. Wishram, I can't say it. Wishram.
Do you have coffee there right now?
I do. Let's take a sip.
Everybody drink.
Wishram was at that point, I don't know if it still is, a crew switchover point for a lot of the trains. So, and most of the families who lived in Wishram were connected to the railroad in one way or another. At the time that we lived there, and somebody could verify this, but I think my recollection is that the population was somewhere around 700 people total. But I used to get on my glider swing, and if I heard the trains coming, you'd hear them, you'd hear the engines, but you'd hear the horns as they were approaching. And the crews would look for me in the backyard and wave to me, and I would wave to them from the engines. There's Steve.
There
he is. There's Steven in his little outfit. I remember playing in our backyard with neighbor kids. I remember playing, my quote girlfriend at the time was a year younger than me. I think I was 4 and she was 3. Her name was Susie. And their house was a little bit across the street and kind of edged off a little ways from ours. And I remember playing in her backyard, but she had a dog, and it wasn't a mean dog or a big dog, but it would, if it got loose, it would like run around and bark. And I was afraid of it. And I remember getting up on the ladder of the slide on her swing set to keep away from her dog. I remember other events. One of the key ones is this. I was probably somewhere between 4 and 5 when this happened. But my mom, again, how small a town Wishram was. I'd get up from my nap. I'm sure this happened more than once, but I remember this one. I'd get up from my nap, and my mom's going to send me to get a haircut. So what she did was she timed it very specifically in mid-afternoon, mid to late afternoon, gave me the money for the haircut and a note to give to the barber, and just sent me walking by myself from one end of Wishram to the other. Because where we lived on Railroad Street, we were also on the east, close to the east end of town. The downtown area, if you'd like to call it that, the business area of Wishram, was on the west end of town. At 4 or 5 years old, I walked by myself over there, walked to the barber shop, and gave the barber the note and the money, and was like, yep, okay, did my haircut. And when I got done, then I walked across the street to where the railroad depot was, and my dad worked in the office at the railroad depot. And so it was time to where I would get there close to when he was getting off work. And normally then he would just drive me home. On this particular day, when he got done, he had me walk with him out to the platform, where the train platform on the track side. And we walked down, and there was a switch engine sitting on the tracks. And we walked down and got on the switch engine. I got to sit on the engineer's lap. I got to toot the horn. I got to work the throttle. I drove a train at
4 years
4 or
old.
5 years old. Yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah. So those are among my key memories of living in Wishram. I mean, I've got other little flashes. I remember, for instance, I know this one was around the time that I was 4.5 years old. Well, first of all, that time frame, my little sister Carla was born in August of 1960, so a little bit past my 4th birthday. I remember getting up that morning, Kathy and I looking in Mom and Dad's room, and their bed was made and they weren't there, and we could hear voices out in the living room, and got out there, and Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Wally were in the living room and said, your mom's at the hospital, she's going to have the baby. And then we rode with them back to Sweet Home, Oregon, where they lived, and stayed there with them for a couple of weeks. You know, knew Mom.
Are Joan and Wally still with us?
Wally is no longer with us. Wally passed away a few years ago. Joan is still with us, his wife. They weren't married yet at that time. He was still in gosh, he may still have been in high school at that time. I'm not sure. He may have been like a senior in high school. But we stayed in Sweet Home, and I remember we knew the day that Mom and Dad were going to come to Sweet Home to bring my baby sister, infant sister Carla, and get ready to take us back home. And my Aunt Mary Kay was trying to keep us occupied all day because we were just on pins and needles. Mom and Dad were going to get there sometime later that day, probably closer to evening. And we were actually next door at their neighbor's house. My grandparents' neighbors were the Shermans. And my Aunt Mary Kay's best friend was Susan Sherman. And so Susan and Mary Kay were keeping us occupied, Kathy and I. And then got the call that Mom and Dad had arrived and worked there, and we could look out the window from upstairs at the Shermans and see their car in the driveway. We ran over there, and I remember again walking in the back door of Grandma and Grandpa's, their kitchen door was the back door that we used, and came through the kitchen, and my mom and dad were in the living room. My mom was holding Carla. So 4 years old, a little over 4 years old in that August. I also remember that sometime probably that fall, being in the living room, I think coloring or playing with toys, while my mom and dad were watching the Kennedy-Nixon debates before the 1960 elections.
Oh my gosh.
Couldn't follow what was going on, but they were very keyed in on it, right?
So just the idea of you were a child, you don't necessarily have the memory of the debates, but the parents watching the debates.
I remember it was on TV.
Infamous Kennedy and Nixon debates.
Yeah. And I remember, things like some of the Christmases and birthday parties and stuff, but they kind of jumble together.
Right.
So, we've talked a lot. That was the first 5 years of my life, but that was Wishram. And, it's easy for me to keep track of certain timelines because I can remember where we lived or what school I was going to. And I didn't go to school in Wishram. I was too young. They didn't have kindergarten. So even though I had turned 5, before we moved. I didn't start going to school till we moved to Portland, and it was a bit
I didn't realize that.
overwhelming and traumatic for me to start kindergarten, and I was very much a mama's boy and a homebody, and so that was scary for me. And I started kindergarten during probably again that fall. It hadn't been in session that long. In my brain, I remember growing up thinking, well, I was only there half the year, but I actually started probably in October, November to go to school. It was at Laurelhurst Elementary School in Northeast Portland.
Are they still around?
As far as I know. When we went to school there, and then during first grade, the next year, my mom decided we were living in an apartment. And my mom, well, take that back. We were still at Laurelhurst, my first grade year. And I remember the day of the very famous or infamous Columbus Day storm in October of 1962. And I remember walking home from school that day, and interesting, we didn't have the same kind of weather forecasting we do now. There wasn't any real advance warning about this storm, but I remember walking home from school with some papers or something from first grade, and the wind was gusting. It wasn't blowing steadily, but there were these gusts, and then it would calm down. And I got home, and there's a long story around that, but I remember my dad got home before my mom did. My mom had to take the bus home. She worked in downtown Portland. My dad drove home, and he got home, and my grandma and grandpa Glavin, my dad's parents, were going to be in town, coming into town and staying with us at our apartment that night, that weekend. And Dad took Carla and Kathy and I to the store. It was a Fred Meyer store on Gleason, Northeast Gleason, and to get some things for that weekend. And as we left the store, it all of a sudden was getting really windy. And I remember pulling out of the parking lot at the Fred Meyer, and like you were starting to see signs that were rotating signs spinning around. There was a gas station by the Fred Meyer. It had a big wooden sandwich sign advertising its prices that blew down the street. And it was just all of a sudden this storm was hitting. And we got to our apartments, and the apartment complex sat kind of on a hill. The street above, Gleason was above, and then down below, the garages were sort of on the bottom edge of this courtyard apartment complex that we lived in. And we were in the last apartment at the far end of the courtyard. And as we got out of the car down by, so Dad could put the car in the garage, and we were carrying groceries and trying to hold on to Carla, who was just 2 years old at the time. And you could, as we got up to the top and
Carla blew away.
Carla blew away. We never saw her again. Started to see shingles coming off the roof like somebody was dealing cards. And as we got up to the courtyard, one of our neighbors who was directly across from us, they had a toddler, and the toddler was crying, and their upstairs window was broken. And she said, yeah, shingles just came through their window. We got into our apartment. Grandma and Grandpa were already there, as I recall, and Dad had probably given them a key or left a key for them, and they helped us get inside. And we were concerned about Mom getting home because she had to take the bus and then walk down part of that hill. She got there safely, but then we lost electricity, and we didn't have electricity through the rest of the night into the morning. Everybody around the city of Portland was out of electricity, but it turned out in our apartment complex, ours was the only apartment that ended up with no broken windows.
Wow.
Yeah. And, but anyway, I mean, I could go into a lot more detail just about the Columbus Day storm, but I mean, I remember that. I can recall then my mom decided that we needed a house. We needed to own a house. And so we had a house built. I remember going up during the time it was being built in Southeast Portland, and it finally was finished. And I remember being in that house. I remember I had my own bedroom, which was cool. And we only lived there though for probably a little over a year. So I finished first grade in that house and started second grade in that house. And then my mom decided it was too far for her to take the bus to commute to work. And so we sold that house. And again, I have a lot of memories about things that happened during the time we lived there, including that was where we lived when President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. I remember that day very clearly.
I
But
do
then,
want to hear a bit about that from your
okay.
perspective.
Oh, well, what I remember was that I was at school at that time. Kathy and
7?
I were going to a school called Lynch Plaza Elementary School, which I think since now they changed the name of it, but I don't recall what that
And
is.
you were 7 years old?
I was 7, and my sister was in Girl Scouts. It was I think in Brownies at the time, and they were supposed to be going to one of there were like several kid shows, like Rusty Nails, and there were these other shows where kids would sit in the audience in the studio, and we were supposed to go to one of those shows that day. And I say we because Kathy had asked the little Brownie leader if I could come along. I think I was the only sibling who was coming along with their Brownie troop. Or my mom may have called the leader and said, "Can Stephen come with you guys so he doesn't have to be at home alone?" But I was, and bless you, and blessings to you. So I was at school, and it was lunchtime recess. So half the school was in doing lunch, and the other half was out on the playground. I was out on the playground, and one of the other kids came up. I was playing with one kid, and another kid came up and said, "Did you hear that the president was shot and killed?" And we were like, "What?" It was like, I remember there was this disbelief. And one of us was astute enough to know that if that was the case, the flag would be at half mast. Or somebody may have said that
somebody,
or may have been somebody said to us, "Well, the flag's at half mast." But I remember that we kind of snuck out of the playground and went and looked, and the flag was indeed at half mast. And went back, and I don't remember if this was before or after we snuck around, but I remember there was a male teacher doing playground supervision, and we asked him if it was true, and I remember he just very solemn just nodded. He didn't say anything. So I remember then, they canceled the whole going to the kids show because that wasn't happening. All the news was just following this. And I remember walking home with Kathy and getting home and just turning on the TV and the TV being on. And my mom and dad, when they got home from work, were very solemn. But the other thing I remember is that a week later, just a few days later, was Thanksgiving, and a month later was Christmas. And I remember that Christmas, and it was kind of like we were still talking about it. There were still things coming out about the assassination, but life was going on. And it's just interesting when you put those things in perspective, And then by the next year, we moved from that house back in closer to where we had lived before, off of Northeast Gleason, and a different school, though. We were no longer in the Laurelhurst School District. We were going to Mount Tabor Elementary School. And that's where I was for part of third grade. Part of second grade, second half of second grade, and the first half of third grade until we moved again. And it was that first few years of my school life was very disconnected and disjointed, and it was very difficult to feel connected to people. I had friends in each of those schools, but it was hard to feel really established.
You remember your first day at a lot of these places?
Yes, because I typically broke down and started crying.
Oh.
In class.
Oh.
Would go to the teacher and say, I'm feeling, just really sad. Because I'm new, and I'd start crying. But then we moved again, and that's when we moved to the house that we stayed in for the neighborhood we stayed in for quite a while. But we were in Northeast Portland. We were living in a house on Northeast 31st and Wygant, which is about a block off of Northeast Alberta, and exactly a block. We were on the corner. And it was.
I hope as you're showing this on Coffee Breaks, we're showing picures.
We will have pictures. We'll have what pictures we can find. Yes, very definitely. But we stayed there. We moved there in 1965. Early 65. My little sister Corey was born in June of 1965. And then Scott was born a little over a year after that, August of 1966. And so we were starting to outgrow this house that we had just moved into, but we stayed there for another like 2.5 years. But my parents were already saying, we'll probably have to get to a bigger house. I remember thinking, great, I'm going to have to change schools again. And this was like my 6th grade or 7th grade year. And then it turned out that there was a family across the street, basically, in a house or so down, that babysat Carla when she was before she was in school, and then Corey and Scott. The Warnickes were the family, and they knew the family that lived next door to them, which was a single mom and her two like high school or college age daughters. It was just three of them living in this bigger house than what we were in, but it was right across the street. And she found out that they were getting ready to sell the house. And so I don't know all the details and the logistics, but somehow my parents reached out to her, and rather than her putting it on the open market, I think they just worked, and we ended up buying that house. And we were moving there in the January of 1969 was when we were going to move just across the street.
And what was your mom doing? What was her work?
She worked at different places along the way. My dad was continuing to work for the railroad. In Wishram, it was the SP&S Railroad, the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railroad. And then at some point after we moved to Portland, he was still the SP&S, but at some point in there in the 1960s, there was a merger of the SP&S Railroad, Northern Pacific, Great Northern, and Burlington Railroads, and it became the Burlington Northern. It's now the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, but that's what people currently think of.
Okay. So she was doing what kinds of things?
And she worked for different companies. When we lived, I think I have all of the timings right, but when we lived out in Southeast Portland for that brief time, the Columbus Day storm time, and then living out in Southeast Portland, she worked in an office at Portland City Hall. Okay. Another period of time, she worked for a freight company. She worked for, she worked for 2 or 3 different companies, but she was always doing like office work type of work, administrative support type of work.
I'm always interested in hearing those things about like 50s, 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
Here you guys that you're moving over and over and over again, but you're buying a house here or renting and then buying and then buying. And
my dad had
they both were working to keep 5 kids and a house. Yeah. Even back then, which was not
at some common. Points. No, and there were some points that I recall that may have been after either Corey was born or after Scott was born, that my mom did take some time, maternity leave, and she did home babysitting. Basically, our basement was set up as kind of a home daycare, and she was babysitting 4 or 5 kids at a time, besides having, her own kids.
5 of her own. So 9 kids and your mom.
Sort of. But I do remember that we were getting ready to move to the house across the street because it was so close. It's like, we don't need to hire movers. We're just going to move the stuff over. So at the point that we're getting ready to move from the old house to the new house, as we called it, was the January of the biggest winter storm, one of the biggest winter storms in Portland's history, January 1969 storm, where there was snow piled up to the roof lines on the houses from the snow drifts.
Kennedy was in when did Kennedy die?
63. And so now we've moved, we've gone through Corey and Scott being born in the one house from 65 to 60, from early 65 to early 69, we were in the same house, which was the longest we'd been any place other than Wishram. And we moved across the street, but in the middle of this snow, this piled up snow, we're carrying boxes, we're carrying furniture, we're doing it all by hand because we didn't hire movers, we didn't hire a truck.
It's right there. Why would you?
It was right there. But I remember, through the slush in the street, we're carrying stuff across for, I don't know how long that went on, but probably not that long. But we got into that house, and it was, we stayed there for quite a while. We were in that house from early 69 till, my parents divorced in 1971 was when they separated, and divorced in 1972. We were still in the house at that time. And without going into a lot of detail, my mom had issues. My mom was the one who asked for the divorce. She had problems with alcohol. Looking back, it's very likely, although it was never diagnosed, wasn't even really a common diagnosis, but she was probably bipolar. And we would see, particularly as we got older, I mean, there were times when I was younger that I saw the behaviors, but you didn't really connect them at the time.
Yeah.
We knew that she could get angry, blow up very easily at us. She was very loving much of the time. but she was also the very dominant personality within our household. Dad was much quieter, much more stoic, and we didn't feel that close to Dad in those early days. But then after the divorce, Mom, her issues were much more on display. And again, I'm not going to go into a lot of specific details about that, but later that year, later in 1972, I may have some of this timing off just a little bit. I'd have to think about how old I was when and exactly when, but later in the fall of 1972, they kind of reached a breaking point. There was an incident that was a breaking point for my older sister, Kathy, and I. And through a series of events in the next couple of days, we ended up going to live with my dad. And at the time, he was living in a little like one-bedroom apartment. And so, I was sleeping in a twin bed in his room, and Kathy was sleeping on the couch, and he was already looking for a bigger apartment. And he was able to find one that was like a 3-bedroom apartment that was near my high school. And Kathy was out of high school by then.
Kudos to him. That's a big thing to just, kids are coming to stay with me. Okay.
Well, I mean, all we did when we had to spend the night with friends because we couldn't reach Dad the day that we escaped from home, basically. And that makes it sound very dramatic, but it was somewhat dramatic. And we weren't able to reach him till the next day. And when we did reach him, we just said, can you come and get us? We have to talk to you about some things. He came and got us, and we just, in the car, just told him what had transpired. And he listened, and then he said, do you want to come live with me? Just like that. And we said, yes, thank you. And it was about a year later, through another series of very dramatic events, that Carla, Corey, and Scott came to live with us. And so now we're all with Dad, living in this 3-bedroom apartment. So Carla was sharing Kathy's room, Corey was sleeping in Dad's room, and Scott was sharing my room. And so,
and how old was Corey at this time?
Well, this would have been in 1973, so she would have been 8 years old. Scott would have been 7.
During your final year of high school-ish?
I was I think during this period of time, I was in my junior year of high school when they all came to live with us. And as it turned out, my mom still was living in the house that we had moved to in 1969. And through a series of events, she ended up having to surrender the house. She was behind on the mortgage. Dad was paying her alimony or child support or whatever still, but he was paying something she was supposed to be then paying the mortgage, and found out that she was well behind and in default, and they were getting ready to seize the house. And so Dad was able to work to get that settled, but take over the house again. And so we went in and got things ready and stuff and moved back into that house. So I finished my junior year and my senior year back in that house that I had been in for junior high, basically, in the start of high school. So we were away from there for like a couple years and then moved back in. So there's part one. I appreciate it, by the way.
I'm on the edge of tears just thinking of in the 1970s, Grandpa Frank, who is a Holocaust survivor and first generation immigrant, just like I'm a single father in an apartment and my 5 children need a place to be. And okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, I deliberately didn't go into a lot of specific detail about that time and some of the things that went on. It was traumatic. It was a big deal at the time, but it's interesting because we haven't even finished the conversation. We've got more next week, but we covered from the mid 1950s to close to the mid 1970s in that conversation. And there were things I left out. Even as I was going through and editing the video, I mentioned in the comments, like I mentioned all the schools that I went to until we got to that final neighborhood. And I failed to specifically mention that that's when we started Kennedy Elementary School, which is interestingly is now a McMenamins in Northeast Portland that you can go through, and they've kept a lot of the original look and feel. I mean, even the
School
rooms.
there. I can go eat at your school.
Yeah, and the cafeteria is now a cafe, a restaurant, and a lot of the classrooms are now the rooms that you stay in as
The bed and
Airbnb rooms.
breakfast.
Basically, you can, yes, and some of them are specifically marked to as a tribute to key teachers who were very popular, including one of my favorite teachers of all time, Mrs. Palmer. Her classroom that I was in fifth grade is the Mrs. Palmer room as one of the Airbnb rooms. And I have, mixed memories. I had some good years and some challenging years at Kennedy. And then while I was going to Kennedy, we didn't talk about this either. My seventh grade year, the Portland Public School System decided that they were going to start converting from the elementary schools being kindergarten through eighth grade and then going to high school. They were going to start the middle school program. So you'd go to elementary school from 1 to 5, grades 1 to 5, and then 6th, 7th, and 8th would be in a middle school, and then you go to high school. Not like the junior high that are often 7, 8, 9, but we were 6th, 7th, and 8th. And so my 8th grade year, they did the pilot middle school was in our school district, and people like Jerry Thompson and I, who's on here and went to Kennedy, we had to switch to the middle school our 8th grade year and went to Whitaker.
You were finally like
stable,
and there's like no, the entire
I mean, we were going to have to go to high school the year after anyway. The good part was
it's like one more
still change.
One more school.
The just part is that at least all of my friends, most of my friends from Kennedy were also going to be at Whitaker.
Yeah.
And so, but still, that was sort of there were turning points in there as you get older and you're in new situations, making new friends. And then after that, then high school at John Adams High School. Now, here's one of the interesting, just weird facts of life. Kennedy Elementary School is no longer school. It's still, the building's still there, and it's this McMenamins, and it's worth going to if you've never been there. So Kennedy is no longer a school. Whitaker eventually, so Adams High School, and we won't go into a lot of detail on this, was brand new high school. The year before I started, my sister Kathy went there, and the first year it was open, and I went there then starting the next year, my freshman year, brand new high school. And they had built it because they thought the projections were population growth in that area of Northeast Portland. Well, as it turned out, people were moving more out into the suburbs. And the enrollment at Adams never reached the expectations. The school remained open for a total of 11 years as a high school. And they shut it down and moved the students to other area high schools where they had basically started out. The districts were redesigned for where they had been prior to Adams opening. And the Adams building became the Whitaker Middle School for a handful of years. And they sold the Whitaker campus. The original Whitaker campus was in a great industrial area, and they sold it for industrial use. Then they discovered that the way that the Adams, the property had been built on, and the way they had designed the Adams building, the ventilation and stuff wasn't proper, and they found evidences of mold and radon, and they completely shut down the building, and it's now since been bulldozed to the ground. So from that neighborhood, my elementary school, my middle school, and my high school no longer exist. That's cool. But next week we're going to be back. We're going to talk about some additional elements of my life, because I think you started asking me about things that I remember in terms of, what was common, technologies and things that we got used to in that era and what changed, among other things. And I know you said that you would like to follow up and maybe at some point have a conversation. And Carol, that's a good question. It's an excellent
because
question.
Southbridge High School is still around, and that's been a good, 25 years now. So
by now, so you're already surpassing,
we've already won.
Yeah. So as is Conestoga Middle School, as is, any of the schools that you guys went to.
That we went to.
But anyway, so we're gonna come back to that. Listen, I want to share a little bit of what's coming up. We knew we'd probably go a little bit long today, so thanks everyone for sticking with us. Hopefully this has been entertaining and enlightening for you. But I want to share a few things coming up in the next few weeks. First of all, yes, next week we're going to get into some more of this. Chelan's going to actually, Chelan, you're going to be here in person at my house next week. Is that correct? Maybe.
Yes. Yes.
So
I almost descended on you last night, but then I got off work and went, no.
I don't feel like it.
No.
Yeah. So we will be doing part 2 of this that should also be interesting. And I think there'll be a little bit of time afterwards for a little bit of recapping and follow up on it. But the following week is going to be fun as well. We've got a gentleman who he works in the finance industry on the East Coast, and he is also a producer. His company does production for Broadway shows, off-Broadway shows, independent shows, but stage shows, and some big names, some that you heard about during the Tonys this year. Ananth Das will be here to talk about being a producer. What's that all about? What does it mean? Why did he decide to get into producing shows and supporting the arts in that way? So we're going to have that.
And what's his hair routine? I have to know.
And we got to know about the hair routine as well, because wow, that is part of what makes it.
Everyone wants those curls.
I want that hair. But and then we've got some other things planned, but I want to mention something. We posted this a few weeks ago, and I love the double image there of the logo. I'm taking that off for a minute because it's driving my OCD nuts. But we would like to do an episode coming up sometime in the coming weeks. This may very well actually happen in the fall at some point, but we want to start looking toward it and putting out an invitation for anybody out there who is currently or has belonged to book clubs, has belonged to a book club, and we want to have a conversation. We'll probably put as many as 3 or 4 people on the show at the same time who reach out and say, yeah, I've had this experience. We want to find out what's it like to be part of a book club. I've never been a part of a book club. What's it like to do that? What do you like and dislike about, choosing a book that everybody's going to read? What is involved in doing that? What kind of books have you discovered through that process, etc.? So watch for this. We're going to be putting out more specific invitations, but you can, if you're already curious or interested, just send us an email at our cbwsteve@comcast.net email address. That's what they call those. And just let us know that you're interested. We'll be doing more follow-up as we get this kind of put together. But I wanted to share that again. We had it out there and then we dropped it. I think when we first put it out, we said we would like to have feedback by July 30th, which is upon us. And we just didn't do the follow-up to keep getting it out there. So we're going to make it something that we do a little bit later in the summer or fall. And then what are the topics that you'd like to discuss? Who are the guests you would like to see besides Chelan interviewing me, for instance? You can also email to cbwsteve@comcast.net. That's our email. That's the one that we invite people to share ideas, information, your own thoughts, and especially right now, well, not especially, but also if you want to be part of a conversation about book clubs, we can have you in there. Also, just a reminder, we now are 6+ years of doing this, Chelan. This is episode number 277 since we started, and 145 of the episodes have been with guests, more than half. And 97 individuals have joined us at least once, and some, like you, as guest host here today, more than once. And so we feel very privileged. We feel very humbled that people want to continue to be a part of the conversation here. And that includes those of you out here who are in the chat, that you would want to be part of our virtual coffee table. Also, a reminder that we do have a YouTube channel. And we would like to build subscriptions there, because beyond our little intimate coffee table conversations, that's the best place to reach a broader audience. And, whether it's sharing about childhood memories and events, or it's some of the other amazing guests who we have and have had on the show, you can find those videos there. So would you please subscribe if you have not already? You can easily go to YouTube and look up Coffee Breaks with Steve and find our YouTube channel, subscribe, and then click on the bell to be alerted when we do have new videos coming up, and then look at the videos. That's the best way to improve our visibility. The algorithm on YouTube will put us more out front on certain things. And also, if you are a subscriber, copy the site up in the what do they call it up at the top on a website? You've got the thing, the address.
Address.
Whatever that's called, the URL.
that you are.
And send that with some messages to some of your friends and others in your network and say, hey, here's a great site you should be checking into. And they've got some great conversations. People come out there, sometimes they only watch one because the topic appeals to them, but we've heard from people who have just found us sometimes by accident, and been influenced and encouraged by one of our topics and guests. So please,
or by your statement that you make at the end of each coffee breaks, which is very important.
And are you potentially talking about this statement?
Find a way to make a difference in your world this week. You can cut that, but I want to know that I said it. Yes.
Well, we are coming down to the end.
That was very sleek of you.
We have run long today. And again, I want to thank all of you for being here. If I didn't get a chance to say hello, I did see you here, people like Kim Baker. I did see that you were on here, Lisa Steele, and others who tuned in once we were kind of into the video. But definitely want to acknowledge and thank you all for being here and joining us around our virtual coffee table. And Chelan, do you want to, I mean, you already said it in the recording. Do you want to be the one to say it live at the end of our show today?
Can we say it together? Is there,
we can definitely say it together. So you ready? All right, let's do it. Find a way to make a difference in your world this week. That was pretty good. It wasn't bad. We kind of do it. Listen, thank you all for being here. God bless you. Have a great week. Thanks, Chelan. We'll see you all next week on Coffee Breaks with Steve.